Spring Creek, Colorado Territory, 1868. The frontier had a way of breaking a person down to their essential parts. Rose Mackenzie knew this better than most as she stared across the dusty main street of Spring Creek, watching riders approach through the golden haze of late afternoon. At 22, she had already learned that the West was no place for softness. 3 years since her father's passing had hardened her resolve and sharpened her edges. "Those cowboys from the Lazy S will be coming to town for the dance on Saturday, Mrs. Henderson remarked, arranging fabric bolts in the mercantile window. "I suspect they'll all be wanting a dance with you, Rose." Rose smoothed her plain blue calico dress, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. "I've no interest in cowboys and their wild ways, Mrs. Henderson. I have a store to run." The older woman clucked her tongue. "Your father would want you to live a little, dear. Not just survive." But survival was all Rose allowed herself to believe in. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving. It had taken her mother in childbirth when Rose was just 8, and her father to pneumonia 3 winters past. Now the mercantile was hers, a responsibility that left little room for frivolities like dances or courtship. Love was a luxury the West couldn't afford, especially for a woman alone. "I need to finish the inventory," Rose said, turning away from the window and the approaching riders. She retreated behind the counter, seeking refuge in ledgers and numbers that never disappointed. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from the rafters, "Don't let life pass you by, Rosie girl," but she pushed the thought away. The mercantile was her anchor, her purpose. Everything else was just distraction from survival. 2 days later, a stranger pushed through the mercantile door, the small bell announcing his arrival. Rose glanced up from her ledger, and for a moment her practiced composure faltered. He stood tall and lean in the doorway, trail dust still clinging to his denim pants and cotton shirt. His face was youthful but weathered by sun and wind, stubble just beginning to shadow his strong jawline. When he removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, Rose noticed his eyes, clear blue and direct, but with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight eastern lilt that marked him as not quite belonging. "Name's Reid Carson. Just hired on at the Circle D. I'm looking for a few supplies." Rose nodded, all business. "Of course, Mr. Carson, what do you need?" As she helped him gather basic supplies, coffee, tobacco, ammunition for his Winchester, a new shirt for the upcoming dance, she found herself observing his hands. They were strong and calloused, but he handled the merchandise with unexpected care, touching fabrics with consideration rather than the usual cowboy's indifference. "You're new to Spring Creek," she remarked, tallying his purchases. "Yes, ma'am. Rode in with the cattle drive from Texas last week. Mr. Donovan offered me a position." He smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Thought it might be nice to stay put for a while. Most cowboys move on when winter comes." "I'm not most cowboys," the simple statement hung between them. "Will you be at the dance Saturday night, miss?" "Mackenzie, Rose Mackenzie, and no, Mr. Carson, I have inventory to complete." He nodded, accepting her answer without the usual cajoling or disappointment most men displayed. "That's a shame. I'm told it's the event of the season." He paid for his purchases, careful to count out the exact amount. "Thank you for your help, Miss Mackenzie." After he left, Rose found herself staring at the door longer than necessary. There was something different about Reid Carson, something that made her wonder if all cowboys were cut from the same wild cloth after all. The mercantile stood empty Saturday evening, as Rose counted inventory for the 3rd time. Outside, fiddle music drifted from the town hall, along with laughter and the steady rhythm of boots on wooden floors. She told herself she preferred the quiet, the predictability of her solitude. The bell above the door jingled, startling her. Reid Carson stood there again, dressed in a clean white shirt and his best denims, hat in hand. "We're closed, Mr. Carson," she said, though no sign indicated as much. "I know. I came to ask if you might reconsider about the dance." His voice carried no presumption, only a simple question. "Seems a shame to miss it." Rose felt a flutter of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, interest perhaps. Or possibility. She quickly smothered it. "I told you I have work." "The inventory will still be here tomorrow," he said gently, "and I promise to have you back before the clock strikes 10 if that's your wish." Why me? She asked bluntly. Half the unmarried women in town would be happy to dance with a handsome cowboy. His smile was slow, genuine. Because you're the only one who didn't look at me like I was just another cowboy passing through. You looked at me like I was a person worth seeing. The simple honesty in his words caught her off guard. Before she could form a proper refusal, he added, "And I won't step on your toes." I had a mother who insisted her son learn to dance properly. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. That's quite a promise, Mr. Carson. One dance, he said. If you don't enjoy it, I'll escort you right back and never bother you again. Rose hesitated, her father's voice seeming to whisper again from the shadows of the store. Life isn't just about surviving, Rosie girl. It's about living. One dance, she agreed, surprising herself. Let me get my shawl. The town hall blazed with lantern light and vibrated with music. When Rose entered beside Reid, several heads turned. She recognized cowboys from the surrounding ranches, men who had tipped their hats to her in the mercantile but had never seen her outside its confines. Miss Mackenzie, Sheriff Taylor's wife, exclaimed, "What a lovely surprise." Reid's hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a reassuring presence as they navigated the crowded room. 3 cowboys from the Lazy S immediately approached, each asking for a dance. Rose felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Miss Mackenzie promised me the first dance, Reid said smoothly, but I'm sure she'll consider your offers afterward. He led her onto the floor as the fiddle struck up a lively reel. True to his word, Reid danced with unexpected grace, guiding her through the steps with confidence but without the showy bravado of the other cowboys. When her feet faltered, his steady hand kept her from stumbling. You really can dance, she said, surprised. My mother was determined I wouldn't be a complete savage, he replied with a smile. She taught music back in Pennsylvania before marrying my father. As they moved through the figures of the dance, Rose found herself relaxing, even enjoying the warmth of his hand in hers, the way his eyes never left her face when they came together in the pattern. Why did you leave Pennsylvania? She asked when they paused at the edge of the floor. A shadow crossed his features. My parents died in a fire 5 years ago. I couldn't stay after that. The memories, he shook his head. I thought the West might be a place to start fresh. Recognition flashed between them, the understanding of loss, of rebuilding a life from ashes. Before Rose could respond, Billy Thompson from the Lazy S approached, hand outstretched. My turn with the prettiest girl at the dance, he announced, already reaching for Rose. Reid stepped back respectfully, though Rose noticed the slight tension in his jaw. If Miss Mackenzie wishes. Billy was a competent dancer but held her too tightly, his breath heavy with whiskey. Been trying to get your attention for months, he said. Takes a newcomer to get you out of that store, does it? After Billy came Frank Watson, then Mike Lawson, each more forward than the last. By the time she danced with 5 different cowboys, Rose felt overwhelmed. She retreated to the refreshment table where Reid appeared with a cup of punch. Had enough, he asked, no judgment in his tone. I'd like some air, she admitted. He escorted her onto the porch of the town hall. The night air was cool, stars scattered across the black canvas of sky. Music and laughter filtered through the open windows, but out here, Rose could breathe again. Thank you, she said after a moment, not just for the dance, but for not being like them. Reid leaned against the porch railing. My father taught me that a real man doesn't need to prove anything. He just needs to be decent. He studied her face in the spill of light from the windows. May I ask you something, Miss Mackenzie? I suppose. Why did you come with me tonight when you've clearly refused so many others? Rose considered the question, surprised by her own answer. Because you asked like it was my choice, not like it was my obligation or your right. She looked back toward the hall. That's rare out here. The West doesn't have to make us harder, he said softly. Just stronger. The distinction struck her, a new thought contradicting her belief that survival meant isolation. Before she could examine it further, shouts erupted from inside the hall. They hurried back to find 2 cowboys squaring off, Billy Thompson and Frank Watson, both visibly drunk. I saw her first, Billy slurred. Been sweet on Rose for months. Frank shoved him. She danced with me longer. Reid sighed. This is about you. I'm sorry. Rose felt embarrassment flood her cheeks. This is exactly why. Before she could finish, Billy threw a wild punch at Frank, who dodged. The fist connected with a bystander instead, and within seconds, a brawl erupted. Women screamed and backed away as the sheriff pushed through the crowd. "Time to go," Reid said, gently taking Rose's elbow and guiding her toward the side door. They slipped out just as tables began to overturn. In the quiet darkness beside the hall, Rose trembled with anger and humiliation. "This is why I don't attend dances. This is why I stay in my store where things make sense." Reid stood quietly, letting her speak. "The West isn't a place for gentleness or sensibility. It's about survival and nothing else." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I learned that when I buried my father." "I understand," Reid said softly. "When I lost my parents, I wanted to shut everything out too. Rode from town to town, never staying long enough to feel anything." "What changed?" He looked at her directly. "I got tired of just surviving. Started wondering what I was surviving for." His words struck something deep within her, a question she'd never allowed herself to ask. What was she preserving herself for, if not to live? Sheriff Taylor's voice boomed from inside the hall, restoring order. Reid offered his arm. "May I walk you home, Miss Mackenzie? I think the dancing portion of the evening is concluded." For the first time in years, Rose felt a crack in the walls she'd built around herself. She placed her hand on his arm. "Yes, Mr. Carson, I'd like that." Over the following weeks, Reid Carson became a regular customer at Mackenzie's Mercantile. Unlike the other cowboys who came to town, he never appeared drunk or rowdy. He purchased practical items, a new leather work glove, coffee, ammunition, always paying an exact change and often lingering to talk. Rose found herself looking forward to his visits, though she cautioned herself against reading too much into them. Cowboys were temporary fixtures in a frontier town, regardless of their manners or blue eyes. One afternoon in early October, as aspens turned gold in the foothills, Reid arrived with an unusual request. "Miss Mackenzie, I wonder if you might help me select a book." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "Winter evenings get long at the bunkhouse. Thought I might read something." Rose led him to the small shelf of books she kept in stock, mostly practical guides to ranching, mining, and homesteading, with a few novels mixed in. "What interests you, Mr. Carson?" "What do you enjoy reading?" he countered. The personal question caught her off guard. Few people asked about her preferences. "I like Mr. Dickens," she admitted, "and sometimes poetry." He smiled. "Then I'll try Dickens. Which would you recommend for a cowboy with limited literary experience?" She selected a copy of David Copperfield and handed it to him. "This one has adventure, hardship, and eventually hope. I think you might enjoy it." Their fingers brushed as he took the book, and Rose felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the store's small stove. She quickly stepped back, busying herself with reorganizing the shelf. "I was wondering," Reid said, his usual confidence replaced with hesitation, "if you might consider joining me for supper at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening. Just to discuss the book, of course, once I've started it." Rose stared at him, startled by the invitation. No one had courted her, if that's what this was, since before her father died. She had made herself unavailable in every way possible. "I don't think that would be appropriate," she said automatically, then regretted the words as disappointment flickered across his face. "Of course," he said, recovering quickly. "Just a thought. I'll let you know what I think of Copperfield." After he left, Rose stood motionless behind the counter. What was she afraid of? That he would leave eventually, like everyone did? Or that he wouldn't, and then she'd have to reconsider everything she believed about life on the frontier? The bell jangled again, and Mrs. Henderson bustled in. "Rose, dear, was that Reid Carson I saw leaving? Such a fine young man." "Not like the others at all." She selected a spool of thread. "Did you know he helped old Mr. Simmons rebuild his fence last Sunday? Wouldn't take a penny for it either." "I didn't know," Rose said softly. "And he's been teaching little Jimmy Watson to read after church. That boy's father never had time, what with the ranch and all." Mrs. Henderson sighed. "We need more men like that in Spring Creek. Men who understand community." After Mrs. Henderson left, Rose found herself staring at the door, thinking about Reid Carson and his invitation. Perhaps she had been too hasty in her refusal. The next day passed slowly. At closing time, Rose made a decision. She locked the mercantile and hurried to her small rooms above the store. After washing her face, she changed into her best dress, a deep green that brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. She loosened her hair from its severe knot, allowing it to fall in soft waves around her shoulders. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Spring Creek, which wasn't saying much, but they did serve a decent steak and apple pie. Rose hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. What if Reid wasn't there? What if he was, but with someone else? She steeled herself and stepped inside. The dining room was half full, mostly with traveling businessmen and a few local ranchers. In the corner, she spotted Reid sitting alone with his book open beside his plate. He was so absorbed in reading that he didn't notice her approach until she stood beside his table. "Is your invitation still open, Mr. Carson?" she asked. He looked up, surprise and pleasure washing across his features. He stood quickly. "Miss Mackenzie, yes, of course." He pulled out the chair across from him. "I was just reading about young David's journey to his aunt's house. Quite an adventure." "Please call me Rose," she said, surprising herself with the informality. His smile widened. "Only if you'll call me Reid." As they shared a meal, conversation flowed more easily than Rose had expected. Reid spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his father's carpentry shop, his mother's piano lessons. Rose found herself sharing stories of her own, her father's dreams for the mercantile, her mother's love of wildflowers, the journey west when she was just 6 years old. "Why did you really come west?" she asked him eventually. "There must have been opportunities in Pennsylvania after the war." Reid set down his fork, his expression growing serious. "After my parents died, I joined the Union Army. Saw things no one should see at Gettysburg. When it ended, I couldn't go back to our town, too many ghosts." He looked out the window at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I thought I needed empty spaces to forget. Now I'm thinking maybe I needed new memories instead of empty ones." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Rose that had been dormant for years: empathy, connection. "I understand more than you might think," she said softly. "After my father died, I decided it was safer not to care too deeply about anything that could be lost, including people. And now," Rose met his gaze, "now I'm not so certain that's the right way to live." As Reid walked her back to the mercantile after supper, their conversation turned to the upcoming winter. "Mr. Donovan says it could be a hard one," he remarked. "Heavy snow in the high country already. The mercantile will be busy then. Cowboys tend to remember all the supplies they need once they're snowed in." They stopped at her door. In the silver moonlight, Rose could see the question in Reid's eyes, a request for permission to call on her again, to continue whatever had started between them. "Perhaps you could stop by tomorrow," she said, her heart beating faster than she could remember in years, "to tell me more about your thoughts on the book." His smile was worth the risk of her invitation. "I'd like that very much, Rose." As she watched him walk away, hat in hand, until he reached the street, Rose felt a strange lightness. For the first time since her father's death, she was looking forward to tomorrow for reasons that had nothing to do with ledgers or inventory. November brought early snow to Spring Creek. Business at the mercantile increased as ranchers prepared for winter isolation. Reid visited regularly, sometimes just for a few minutes between ranch duties, sometimes lingering by the stove on cold afternoons, discussing books or sharing stories of his day. Rose found herself watching the door, anticipating the jingle of the bell that announced his arrival. When a week passed without a visit, she told herself it didn't matter, that this was the natural order of things on the frontier. People came and went, attachment was foolish. But on the 8th day of his absence, worry overcame her practiced indifference. When Sheriff Taylor came in for coffee, she casually inquired about the Circle D. "Rough week out there," the sheriff said, warming his hands around his cup. "Lost some cattle in that blizzard. Carson and 2 other hands went up into the high meadows to bring down the strays. Should be back any day now." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by concern. The high meadows were dangerous in early winter, with unpredictable weather and treacherous terrain. "I'm sure they'll be fine," the sheriff added, noting her expression. "Carson's proving himself quite capable. Donovan speaks highly of him." That evening, as Rose was closing up, the bell jangled. She looked up to see Reid, snow dusting his shoulders, his face wind-burned and tired. "You're back," she said, unable to hide her relief. He smiled wearily. "Just got in. Wanted to see you before anything else." Without thinking, Rose moved from behind the counter and embraced him. He stiffened in surprise, then his arms came around her, strong and secure. "I was worried," she admitted against his coat. "I'm sorry, we got caught in the storm, had to shelter in an old line shack for 3 days." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "But we saved most of the cattle." Rose stepped back, suddenly aware of her impropriety. "You must be exhausted, hungry too, I imagine." "Both," he admitted, "but seeing you was worth the detour." She quickly gathered provisions, bread, cheese, dried beef, and pressed them into his hands. "Take these." "No charge," she added when he reached for his money. "I can't accept." "Please, it would ease my mind to know you've eaten." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of what she wasn't saying, that she cared. That his well-being mattered to her. "Thank you, Rose." He took the bundle, his fingers lingering against hers. "I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right, when I'm more fit for company." After he left, Rose stood in the empty store, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. The walls she'd built to survive were crumbling, and for the first time in years, she wasn't frantically trying to rebuild them. The Christmas dance was the social event of the year in Spring Creek. Unlike the harvest dance, this was a formal affair, with ladies in their finest dresses and men in clean suits if they owned them. Rose had declined invitations from 3 different cowboys, including Billy Thompson, who seemed determined to court her despite her obvious disinterest. When Reid asked her, however, she'd accepted immediately. "I promise not to start any brawls this time," he'd teased, though they both knew he hadn't been the one fighting. Now, as she dressed in her mother's red silk gown, carefully preserved all these years, Rose barely recognized the woman in her small mirror. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged in soft curls, her cheeks flushed with anticipation rather than the cold. The knock at the mercantile door came precisely at 7. Reid stood on the porch in a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a small package in his hands. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Rose felt a blush deepen her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." He handed her the package, a small Christmas gift. "I hope you don't mind me giving it early." Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I'd like you to have it." "Reid, I couldn't possibly." "Please, she would have liked you." "Very much." His voice was soft but certain. "You remind me of her sometimes, strong, principled." The gift was more than a trinket, it was a piece of his past, something he'd carried all this way. Rose pinned it to her dress with trembling fingers. "Thank you, it's beautiful." The town hall had been transformed with pine boughs and red ribbons. A tall spruce stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and candles. As they entered, Rose was aware of glances and whispers. Reid Carson had made no secret of his interest in her, and Spring Creek had taken notice. Miss Mackenzie, looking radiant as always, Mayor Collins greeted her, and "Mr. Carson, good to see you. I hear Donovan's put you in charge of the South Range." "Yes, sir, it's a good opportunity." Reid's hand rested lightly at Rose's waist, a gesture that felt both protective and proud. They danced 3 times, Reid holding her with respectful firmness, his eyes never leaving hers. Between dances, he brought her punch and introduced her to ranch hands she knew only as customers. Rose found herself laughing more than she had in years. During a break in the music, Reid led her outside to the porch. Snow was falling gently, adding to the drifts already piled along the street. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine. "Rose," he said, turning to face her, "I've been meaning to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "Mr. Donovan's offered me a permanent position as foreman starting in the spring, with a cabin of my own on the property." His eyes searched hers. "I've been thinking about my future here in Spring Creek." Before she could respond, the door burst open. Billy Thompson stumbled onto the porch, clearly drunk. "There you are, Rose, been looking for you." He swayed, pointing an accusatory finger at Reid. "This Pennsylvania boy stealing your attention again." Reid stepped slightly in front of Rose. "Mr. Thompson, you've had too much to drink. Why don't you go back inside?" Billy lunged forward, grabbing Reid's jacket. "Don't tell me what to do, Easterner. You don't belong here." "Let go, Billy," Reid said calmly. I don't want trouble. Too late, Billy swung wildly. Reid dodged, but his foot slipped on the icy porch. He fell backward, his head striking the railing with a sickening crack. He slumped to the ground, motionless. Reid, Rose cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood seeped into the snow beneath his head. Sheriff Taylor burst through the door, taking in the scene at a glance. He grabbed Billy by the collar. "What have you done, Thompson?" "It was an accident," Billy slurred. "He fell." "Get Doc Matthews," Rose commanded, pressing her handkerchief to Reid's wound. "Hurry." The next hours passed in a blur of fear. Doc Matthews had Reid carried to his office, where he cleaned and stitched the gash on the back of his head. Rose refused to leave, holding Reid's hand as the doctor worked. "Nasty concussion," Doc Matthews muttered, "but his skull seems intact. We'll know more when he wakes up." If he wakes up, Rose thought, terror clutching at her heart. She'd lost too many people already, her mother, her father. The thought of losing Reid now, when she'd just begun to open her heart again, was unbearable. "You should go home, Miss Mackenzie," the doctor suggested gently. "I'll send word if there's any change." "No," Rose said firmly. "I'm staying." Through the long night she sat beside Reid's bed, drifting between prayer and memory, every conversation, every smile, every moment they'd shared in the past months. Dawn was breaking when his fingers finally tightened around hers. "Rose," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," she said, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. "I'm right here." His blue eyes, clouded with pain, focused on her face. "You're still in your dance dress." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, well, someone interrupted our evening." Doc Matthews appeared, checking Reid's pupils and asking questions to test his awareness. "You're lucky, young man. Another inch and we might be having a different conversation." He looked at Rose. "He needs rest, plenty of it." "I'll make sure of it," she promised. When the doctor stepped out, Reid squeezed her hand. "You've been here all night." "Of course." "Why?" The simple question demanded honesty. Rose took a deep breath. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, because somewhere along the way you've become important to me, more than important." A slow smile spread across his face despite his pain. "I was trying to tell you something similar last night." Before Thompson interrupted. "Tell me now," she urged. "I love you, Rose Mackenzie, have since that first dance." His words were simple, direct. "I know it hasn't been long, but I'm certain. More certain than I've ever been about anything." The walls around her heart, already crumbling, collapsed completely. "I love you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." He reached up, wincing slightly, to touch her cheek. "Because you think you'll lose me. Everyone I've ever loved has left me." "I'm not leaving," he said firmly. "Not Spring Creek and certainly not you, if you'll have me." In that moment, Rose understood the false belief that had governed her life since her father's death, that loving meant inevitable loss, that the frontier was too harsh for tenderness. Looking at Reid, she realized that perhaps it was the harshness of the West that made love not just possible but necessary. "I'll have you," she said softly, "if you're foolish enough to want a stubborn shopkeeper." His smile was worth every moment of fear. The most beautiful, stubborn shopkeeper in Colorado territory. By spring, Reid had recovered completely and taken up his position as foreman at the Circle D. Rose continued to run the mercantile, but something had changed. The store no longer represented survival alone, it was now part of a future she was building with Reid. On a warm May evening, they sat on the bank of Spring Creek, a picnic spread between them. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped against the blue sky. "I have something to ask you," Reid said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Rose's heart skipped as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Rose Mackenzie, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, support you, and be gentle with your heart for all the days of my life." Tears blurred her vision. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Rose marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a young woman convinced that the frontier allowed no room for love, to a bride-to-be planning a future with a man whose gentle ways had shown her that even in the harshest places, love could not only survive but flourish. "What are you thinking?" Reid asked, kissing her hand. "That I was wrong about the West," she admitted. "I thought it was only a place for hardness and survival, but you showed me it can also be a place to build something beautiful." Together, he agreed, pulling her close. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rose rested her head on Reid's shoulder. The frontier hadn't changed. It was still wild, still demanding, still unforgiving in many ways. But she had changed. She had learned that true strength wasn't found in isolation but in connection, not in walls but in bridges. Many cowboys had invited her to that dance last summer, but only one with his respect, his patience, and his gentle ways had caught her heart. And in doing so had taught her how to truly live, not just survive, on the American frontier.